China's influence in Africa has been growing, and with that influence, the US and other Western countries are not particularly happy. In 2019, China was said to have taken control of the only international airport in Uganda as one of the consequences of what experts now call debt trap diplomacy.
Meanwhile, Uganda has lost its only international airport that it had to China after it failed to repay its loan.
Should we be worried? And is the Chinese government working out of pure kindness, or is there an ulterior motive? China launched a massive takeover of the African continent. As the second largest economy in the world, China has a GDP of $17 billion and is right behind the United States, which has a GDP of $25 billion. Financial economists such as H. Liu have argued that China's economy will surpass the US economy in the next decade or two. The economists, however, stated that if economic power is only dependent on GDP, China has no chance of overtaking the US on the world stage because China is very populated and is constrained by land size as well. So China will not be able to export natural energy and food. Exports like these are major drivers of the economy, and they boost the GDP because of the foreign exchange they give to the exporting country. For China to be able to overtake the US, it will have to focus on creating technological innovation and establishing prominence in other countries, especially the developing countries. Could this be the reason why China has been involved in Africa over the past years? Let's look at the relationship between China and some African countries. How did China set its eyes on Africa, and when did all this start? The relations between China and Africa began after China's civil war in 1947. During the Cold War, China actively supported movements such as the African Liberation Movement. This in turn strengthened the bond between the two bodies. The bond was further strengthened in 1971 when countries like Burkina Faso, Malawi, Liberia, and Senegal voted for PRC control of China's seat in the United Nations General Assembly. In 1999, the Chinese government created a strategy to encourage more Chinese companies to see Africa as a ripe investment location. This strategy was popularly known as the Going Out strategy. The Going Out strategy began a new wave of relations between African countries and China, which led to many Chinese investors trooping into the African continent to do business and invest in Africa.
As China's influence in Africa grows, so does the controversy. Depending on whom you ask, you'll either get excitement about all the new infrastructure or accusations of neocolonialism.
The Lagos Light Rail project is one of the mega projects in Africa which has benefited from Chinese investment. 1/4 of all Chinese investments are located in Nigeria and Angola. China is also Africa's largest trading partner, reaching $198.5 billion in trade revenue in 2012. These statistics prove that Chinese involvement in Africa is not just a speculation. The Asian country is releasing more money into Africa than any other country. This is just the beginning. The involvement of China in Africa's economy is expected to grow systematically in years to come. China is expected to invest more money into training Africans in more innovative and technological sectors to prepare them for the future. In addition, China is also expected to invest more in the African market to fuel domestic growth and enable the continent to develop faster. These interventions look very harmless, and it is easy to assume that the Asian country is concerned about the development of the African continent and does not expect anything in return.
That sounds too good to be true.
But foreign aid and investment always comes with conditions. Why is China investing so much in Africa? Is this a form of neocolonialism? Should Africa be alarmed by these large investments made by the foreign country? As Africa's largest trade patron, China's impact on the continent is massive. Based on surveys conducted on Africans about their thoughts on China's involvement on the continent, most Africans responded favorably.
The equation wins, Zambia wins, China wins.
They view China as a much-needed help to the economic development of Africa. Some Africans believe that as a developing continent, they need some help from more developed countries, but there has been some opposition from some African leaders. Michael Sata, former president of Zambia and a very prominent political figure, was very vocal against the excessive involvement of the Chinese in Zambia.
We don't need Chinese manpower. What we need is their technology. If we utilize the Chinese technology, both from Taiwan or from Peking, Zambia would develop in all fields.
In 2011, the then presidential candidate Sata voiced out his opposition towards Chinese involvement in the coal mines of Zambia and the bad treatment Zambian workers experience under Chinese managers.
We have lots of people export. They use our sweat, and when they export, we get nothing out of that. Now that is, somebody must look at that and think seriously.
This happened after Chinese managers shot Zambian protesters who were demonstrating for better work services.
We are really suffering. All these people, they are busy cheating us.
They don't care about us being safe. They don't do that for us.
Dangerous, too much dangerous.
Michael Sata's criticisms was not baseless and created the impression that the Chinese were exploiting Zambian resources. Is this a clear case of neocolonialism? Zambia has been one of the African countries that have strongly opposed Chinese managers and their involvement in coal mines in the country. There was a civil strife in Zambia in 2012. This was due to the increase in Chinese coal mining companies in the mining area. 1,200 Zambians went on protest to advocate for an equitable and balanced working environment for Zambians. Most Chinese activities and companies in Africa also operate with a lack of transparency or accountability. Reports of China's lending to the African continent are often handled in secrecy. The Asian country runs like an embassy, which is not subject to the laws of their host countries. They also run a strict non-interference policy in the African countries they operate. This means that African governments are not allowed to interfere with the operations of many Chinese entities on the continent. To make matters worse, Chinese involvement in Africa barely protects Africa's environment and livestock, especially around mining areas. Trees are cut down and plantations are depleted without replacement. But it hasn't all been bad news. The Chinese have been of great help to the African continent. The Asian country has invested greatly in the infrastructural framework of Africa. The General Referral Hospital in Niamey, Niger, was built by the Chinese, and it offers very relevant medical services to Nigerians. China also built the Burundi Presidential Palace. These are just a few examples of China's major building projects in Africa. All these investments are impressive, and even more are expected to be constructed because the Chinese continue to strengthen their ties with Africa. How does China plan to use these investments to its benefit in the future? The Western world has been the main lender for the African continent for several decades. Intergovernmental organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have given African countries aid and grants, leading to more control of the West in Africa. With China's impact on Africa gaining prominence, the West may lose its hold on Africa. As the Chinese impact on the continent grows, the United States and the European Union will be forced to the sidelines in their involvement in Africa. Additionally, for countries to dominate on the world stage, their involvement in the African continent plays a major role. Africa's human and natural resources are of great importance to the West, and with China's involvement in the continent, the US may be affected. Is Africa a pawn in the economic game between China and the United States? The West has a long history of exploitation in Africa. Let's explore that now. Over the past decades, Africa's natural resources have attracted countries from Europe, North America, and South America. There's a long history of the slave trade and exploitation of resources, from the Portuguese, who first arrived on the shores of the then Gold Coast, now Ghana, to the British, who first arrived in Nigeria in 1884. The end game of Western countries has been the exploitation of Africa. Africa's natural resources such as gold, bauxite, manganese, diamond, and others greatly benefit the West. Colonialism is a thing of the past, but a new version of it has resurfaced on the African continent. This new wave of colonialism is known as neocolonialism. This is a general way that former colonizers influence their former colonies' socio-economic and political activities. Pan-Africanist and Ghana's first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, in his book Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, states the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. Neocolonialism is not a theoretical term. Many African countries today cannot embark on projects without visiting their previous colonial masters for aid and grants. Projects like the construction of roads, schools, and hospitals are often aided by international bodies and advanced countries, many of which are former colonizers of African countries. The grants and aid mostly come with conditions that further subject African countries to the control of Western countries, although they are independent in theory. An African proverb states, "When two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers." Will Africa's future suffer because China and the US are contending to share the continent's resources? African leaders continue to look to the West and China for loans and grants. As long as this continues, Africa may be subject to exploitation of its human and natural resources. Is neocolonialism playing out before our eyes? With China accumulating a large debt stock in Africa and the West scrambling for more resources in the continent, where does it ever end? Africa is on the market again, being sold to the highest bidder, and African leaders continue to watch on as external bodies exploit the continent for their own gain. In the battle between two world economies, Africa has become the pawn. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more relevant African-related information. Also, turn on the notification button to get notified of new video uploads. Until next time.